Elizabeth from Felted Sky, here with the instructions for our Pumpkin Friends needle felting kit in our Sculpting with Wool series of kits. So let's go ahead and open up the box and talk about what's inside. So here we have the instruction sheet and the beginner's guide to needle felting. This is some general information that I recommend reading through if you're new to needle felting before you start the project. Hopefully that will be helpful. In the instruction sheet, I just want to point out one thing, and that is that the extra numbers next to each step, that's a timestamp for the video. So if you want to fast forward or rewind and skip around in the video, you should be able to do that easily with those timestamps. So in the box here we have the wool balls. These are 100% wool that have been wet felted. They still have some squish and give to them. That's so that we'll be able to form the grooves on the pumpkin, the indents. So we'll set those aside for now. These are the stems. So these have also been prepared for you. This is wet felted wool as well. So each one of those will be one of the stems. And this is the wool mat. So this is going to be the work surface that we'll be using to make the leaves. This is a very long-lasting work surface. It's also 100% sheep's wool, and again, wet felted. So these are the needles in the tube, but we'll come back to that. So in the box here, we still have the wool. So this is the colors you'll be using. This is our Felter's Palette Needle Felting Wool. It's very nice to work with, and the color is here on the paper label. You might want to note that I will be referencing that in the instruction sheet and video. And to prepare the wool, you want to take off the paper label and find the end and unroll it. And then it also has folded flaps on one side that you want to find and open up. Sometimes they're a little bit difficult to find, so just as gently as possible, open those up. And you'll want to do that with all of the other pieces of wool before we get started. So just a little bit about the needles. On the tube here on the back, there is a color code of all the needles that we carry. So we just have one tube printed. So in here, your needles are painted brown on the top. So that's the 38 twisted needle. It's a nice general needle, and that's all we'll need for this project. So you have two in case you bend or break one, then you will hopefully be able to finish with the other needle. So just a little bit about how to hold them. I often see people starting out felting and they hold at the very top of the needle like that. I don't recommend that, but instead put the needle in the crook of your pointer finger, or some people like to put more of the tip of their pointer finger on the top of the needle, and then hold halfway down with your thumb and middle finger, and then you might also want to put a ring finger on there as well. So this is the needle grip that I use, and I find that it's more comfortable and just works a little better to support the needle. So on the bottom of the needle here, they're hard to see, but there's little notches that we call barbs, and that's what's actually doing the felting. And then you want to watch putting too much sideways pressure on the tip of the needle. So the sideways pressure is what causes it to bend or break. So you want to try and poke straight in and straight out, even if you're changing the angle of the needle as you're going in and out. You want to go straight in and straight out. Let's just go ahead and jump right in now. And this was my piece of terracotta wool. This is actually much thinner than usual. So I'm going to go ahead and use it because sometimes there is variation in the wool. And then you'll see how to work with that. So kind of squish your ball and figure out what might be a good top and bottom so that the pumpkin will stand easily. And then we're going to put the wool around the sides. So just wrap it around, and then when you get to where there's an overlap, we're going to tear off the extra. And here we have extra at the top and bottom as well. So just lay this out on the ball, and then where the overlap is, you want to hold with your other hand and then pull off the extra. And then make sure it's all laying kind of flat. And then at the top, this is, again, not really usual for this type of wool, but we're just going to pull off any extra. And we're going to be using that to cover up the thin spots. So here we probably just need to tear off a little bit. The idea is just to cover the ball with the wool that you have. And this piece of wool has thin areas, so we're going to use our extra pieces that we tore off to fill those in. So now you just want to stab in with the needle, and you don't need to stab very close together at this point, and we're going in perhaps 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch on the needle. So we're just kind of tacking this wool on. The stabbing motion is going to attach the wool we just put on the ball to the ball. So just kind of rotate the ball around and poke the wool that you just wrapped around the ball. And you should be poking down into the ball. So there on that end, just wanting to kind of make that as tidy as possible and get the wool attached. I'm also going to show you another ball with a wool that wasn't thin, but this one has all these thin spots where I can kind of see the ball through the wool. So this will show you, if you happen to get a piece of wool like this, how you would fill in over the thin spots. You just want to take your extra pieces of wool. The fibers are going in that direction. The fibers were going in this direction when we put the wool on the ball. So if you can, just try and note the direction of the fibers, because if you add pieces on, you want to try and keep the fibers going in the same direction. If you can't tell, it's not going to make much of a difference, but it will go on a little better with the fibers in the same direction. So here, of course, more thin spots where I'm seeing some of that ball through the wool. So I'm just going to add more pieces on and try and keep them kind of as tidy as possible. I'm going to spread out the fibers so there's not lumps and bumps. Just try and smooth the fibers out, and if you can tell the direction the fibers are aligned, try and keep them in the same direction as what's already on the ball. If you've never worked with wool before, that might be hard to tell, but it will be fine in the end. It's a pumpkin, and it's still going to turn out well. Alright, so this one has so many parts to fill in. I'm just going to keep filling in. And the idea here is not to really do too much felting on it. We're just getting the wool attached to the ball. Don't want to poke too much yet. The more you poke, the more firm and smooth and finished it will get, and we still have to put on the indented ribs. So you just want to tack on at this point, and we're going to work on making it all look good and smooth later. One more thin spot here. Once this is all the way filled in, I'll also show you how to wrap the wool around and do this part without a wool that is so thin. And there's still a little bit left, so I did get it all the way covered up with the wool that was there. Alright, so that's how your pumpkin should look, something like that at this point. So here is another one, and here's what the wool more often looks like. So I'm gonna, again, figure out what I might want to be the top or the bottom. It's generally best to have the flatter parts at the top and bottom. So then we put the wool around sideways. And there's not as much to tear off, but we're also not going to have as much to fill in. So you want that overlap, and hold and pull off. And smooth out the fibers, the overlap. And then here on the top and bottom, we might need to fill in a little bit, but the sides you see are all the way covered when the wool is thicker. So now on this one, I'm going to pull the wool towards the center of the part that I want to fill in. Kind of move the wool gently into place with the needle, and you can be poking with the needle pointed towards that middle of the ball. So whatever way your needle is pointed, that's the direction it's going to push the wool. And the wool will move in that direction. And you can also deliberately, very gently move the wool and then poke it down. So that side did get all the way filled in. Don't need the extra piece yet. We'll see what happens on the other side. So here at the overlap, I just want to smooth out that kind of lumpy part there. And then again, move the wool towards the area you want to fill in. Move wool and then poked down. And just watch putting too much sideways pressure on the tip of the needle. You want to gently move the wool into place and then poke it down. We do have a little spot to fill in here, so I can take a little bit of that extra piece and just put that right over the extra spot and poke it down. So there's still just a bit extra if we had a thin spot that we needed to cover. Well, this is pretty good, so now I'll just poke a little bit more to make sure the wool is attached. So always watch your other fingers while you're poking. You want to try not to stab yourself, obviously. It does hurt, and you can get a really good poke onto your finger. And we try and keep the other fingers out of the way of the needle. Alright, there might be one little thin spot there, but it's not too bad. Alright, I think I'm going to return to this other ball to show you the next part. So we're going to start at the top or bottom. So that's where you had the wool gathered up there. And here's the example pumpkin. So we're going to try and divide the pumpkin into 5 segments at this point. So you want the face segment to be a little bit bigger than the other one so that we have room to put the face on. So that's what it's going to look like there on the bottom. We're going to put the 2 lines in indents that create the face segment, and then we'll work on the other ones. So on your ball, look at the ball to see if there's a spot that looks like it looks good for the face. You want to make sure there's not, bumps or lumps or thin spots for where the face will be. And then start poking down in a line from a point on the top to somewhere around the midpoint of the bottom. So the more you poke on this line, the more it will indent. So you want to poke in pretty deeply, pretty far at this point to get the indented lines. And then think about where you want the other line to be. So that will be a good segment for the face. So I'm going to go from that top point down a bit of a curved line. It's not entirely straight. I want to get down to the bottom point. The midpoint on the bottom. Now if you put in a line gently and then decide you don't like it, you can still pop it out just a little bit using the tip of the needle. You just have to be very careful of that so you don't bend or break the tip. So if you want to put it in very subtly first, just by poking gently, and then make sure you like it and then poke more, you could do that. But once you have both lines in, then you just need to keep poking on them until you see that indent. Just keep poking over the same spot. Now here at the bottom, we want to divide the rest of this into 4 segments, but I'm going to start that by putting in the next line. So it's going to be kind of like a Y. You can see the first segment lines come to a point there, and then I'm going to put a straight line off of that going around the back of the pumpkin. So this line goes around the back, and to me it looks kind of like a Y with what we've put in. So those 2 indented lines and then the straight line coming from that point all the way around the back to the center point on the other side. So now we have 3 segments, and then I'm going to divide each of the biggest ones here into 2. And we'll end up with 5 segments on the pumpkin. I'm going to go from that top point again, trying to cut this segment in 2 and put the line down to the point on the other end. So you can go over this as many times as you need to, but you want to go over it until you see that nice indent. And here's the one on the other side, so this will create the rest of the segments. These don't have to be perfectly even or perfectly placed. It is a pumpkin, so however you get them in, it's still going to look like a pumpkin. So once you have the lines, you just want to keep poking them. So we want a nice indent that's very well defined. So just continue poking. You want to be going in fairly far, I would say a good 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Really need to give it some oomph at this point, really get it in there. So when my thumb and middle finger is kind of on the middle of the needle, I am stabbing in far enough that I kind of feel the pumpkin on my middle finger. If you're not stabbing in very far at this point, it's just going to be hard to make good indents. So stab in far and keep stabbing on those same lines. I'm going to let the video continue running, but if you feel like you've gotten this, you can always jump ahead to the next part where we start finishing the segments and making them smoother. If you're new to felting, I just want you to see that it is a process and you have to spend some time on this part. I often like to listen to a podcast or an audiobook or some music while felting. It doesn't work so well to watch TV or try to carry on a conversation where you need to be looking at something. If you look away, that's often when you will poke yourself unintentionally. You want to stay focused on what you're doing, but you can definitely be listening to something. We're getting closer, definitely getting closer. I'm just going to keep stabbing a little bit longer on the lines. Some of them are a bit more indented than others. We're trying to get kind of an even level of indent on all of the lines. I also find that needle felting is very relaxing. It's almost meditative when you kind of get in the zone. And all this repetitive stabbing, you will develop a muscle memory and it will get easier. You'll kind of build up your felting muscles. So like anything, it just takes practice to kind of develop your rhythm and develop that stabbing motion as a muscle memory. Alright, so this is pretty good now in terms of my indents. I'm always seeing things that I could improve, but we'll go ahead and move on. So now I'm going to finish each segment. You can see on my example pumpkin, it's smoother. You can still see puncture holes, but the holes are very close together, so they're not as noticeable. So here's how we want to start that. So we're going to go in now not very far on the needle, perhaps just 1/4 of an inch or just on the very tip there of the needle. So you want to poke in more gently so it's not going in as far, and you want to poke in at an angle. So kind of it's a 45-degree angle, and we're going to try and push the wool towards the center of the segment so we maintain the roundedness there. So we're going to push in. It's kind of like pushing in from the side, poking from the side towards the center of the segment. So at this point, you're going to poke more gently and not go in as far with the needle. That is the idea. You want to poke very close together. So you want your pokes to be very close together, and then the smoothness happens when you can poke close together and at an even depth. So the even depth also just takes some practice as you kind of develop your felting skills and those, the muscle memory. But just go as slowly as you need to and just poke, poke, poke close together and trying to get an even depth, but not much depth at this point. We're just poking in closer to the surface. That side's about done. I'm going to flip over to the other side so that I can, again, push towards the center. If you're left-handed, you'll just be kind of doing this in the opposite order or whatever, but you're still going to be poking the wool towards the center and then flipping to the other side. So wherever you see it's still kind of popped out or lumpy and bumpy, you want to poke more there. And if you have indents where you don't want them to be, so if you have parts that are already a little too indented, you want to poke less there. It's just trying to get the surface very even, and that will help it to look smooth. So when you get to the very center, you can poke kind of straight down in, but when you're poking from the sides, you always want to be poking with that needle angled towards the center. Kind of feel like you're poking from the side of the segment. You just do this as long as you need to until the wool is looking kind of condensed and flattened and not so fuzzy anymore. You want it looking just smooth and a little firmer and more finished. You can felt down even farther than we're going to with the pumpkin. The more you poke, the harder it will get, the more firm, and the more condensed it will become. So it shrinks down a little bit as you're doing the finishing felting. This is just going to be a decoration, so we don't need to take it to the point of it being super hard and firm, but we want it to be nicely finished. Here I have a little bit of a thin spot in the wool that I couldn't really see until I was doing this finishing poking. So even at this point, you can cover up thin spots. Actually, I'm noticing I put it on the wrong one, sometimes on the video. Not seeing it as well. Alright, so there was the thin spot. So you just put a little piece of wool on and poke it down using the same type of poking pattern. So from the side, small little gentle pokes close together. And that's just going to blend right in, and you'll never be able to tell that you had to add a little piece there. Just a random little bit of wool sticking up, so I'm going to poke that down. Alright, so also here was kind of a lumpy, thick part, so I'm going to try and smooth those fibers out. It just wasn't laying down that nicely. You just keep messing with this, poking until you feel like it's looking good, looking more smooth, not fuzzy. We want the wool to be well attached and to be a little bit felted, which is what the needle action is doing. So after you do the middle of the segment, I often feel the need to go back over the indents. So as you've kind of condensed the segment and it's shrunk up just a little bit, shrunk down, then you probably will need to go over your lines on either side and make sure the indent is still looking good. So now I'm just going to continue on and do that same thing to all of the segments in the same way. So here's what the pumpkins look like now that I have done all of them. So 5 segments, a bigger face segment on the front, and I worked ahead and got them all smoothed out and finished there. You can see they don't turn out exactly the same, even though I'm trying to keep them consistent. They all turn out a little bit different. It's kind of the fun of it, and that's just fine. So if they're not standing well, this is just a little extra thing you can do. So you can flatten out the bottom. So just by poking on the bottom, whatever parts are maybe too puffy and making it not stand so evenly or so well. So just flatten out whatever parts look like they're causing it to maybe lean one way or another. Flatten out the whole bottom of the pumpkin if you want. Now it's standing a little bit better. That's something you may need to do or you may not. It just depends kind of how everything is gone as you're shaping the pumpkin. If you need to flatten out, you can always just poke right on the bottom until the areas are flat that you need to be flat. Alright. So now we're going to talk about leaves. So here are my original pumpkins. And this one I put one larger leaf on. This one has 3 small leaves. And this one has kind of 2 medium leaves. So the leaves are something that you can change if you want to. And your leaves probably won't look exactly like mine. That's alright. So we're going to get out the ivy colored wool, and the fibers are going lengthwise, so we want to tear with the fibers and tear kind of a rectangle of wool. Tear 2 little strips like this. You don't have to be perfect. So 2 pieces of wool and put the bigger one on the top, and then going to fold those edges under and try and create a leaf shape. So if you feel like your leaf is not quite the size you want, you can add another piece. This would be 3 pieces with a smaller piece added kind of in the center of it to give me a little more curve in the center of the leaf to work with. You can try it on your pumpkin, so when you folded it into the shape that you kind of like, you can kind of look at it on the pumpkin and see, yes, is that going to look good? And then we can set that aside. So now if you're tearing for smaller leaves, you just need to tear smaller pieces of wool. You want to tear into the wool and pull off pieces that are a little bit smaller. So again, I'm going to start with 2 pieces. Usually 2 pieces is enough, and then I'm going to fold these under, trying to keep a point at the top and bottom, and then curve in the middle. You want to try it out on your pumpkin. They're going to shrink down a little bit as we're felting them, so they won't be quite this big, but it's going to be a similar shape to that. You want to really work on getting your shapes the way you like them at this stage, the way you want them to be. And then if you pull off wool and you have too big of pieces and you can't fold the leaf into a small enough shape, you need to pull off some wool. Or try again with a smaller piece of wool. So I would divide for the leaves first before you start any of the felting on the leaves. So it's common to tear your wool too big and kind of put too much wool into these. So there should be plenty of wool here, but I just recommend still tearing and folding up the leaves first, and then start felting them. So just make sure you have all of the ones that you're going to need. If you don't have much wool left at the end of this, you're putting too much wool in the leaves. You can make more leaves if you want. There's extra wool, or you could make them thicker than mine are if you want. But just as a general rule of thumb, get them ready first, and then if you need to move wool around, you can move it around before you start actually forming the leaves. So there's kind of a medium leaf shape. My other pumpkin here. Alright, and the last one I want to try to make similar so that I have 2 about the same size for that pumpkin. So put the pieces together and fold under. Okay. If one of them is bigger, you can pull off a little bit of wool. If one of them needs more wool, you can add a bit to wherever it needs a bit more wool. And try and get 2 that are similar for that one. Alright, so here's what I have when I've divided wool for the leaves. And now we'll talk about how to felt them. And you should have plenty of wool left over if you want to make other leaves, or just save that for another project. Or if you feel like you've messed up any of the leaves, you can always make another one with the extra wool. So now you want to put this shape onto the mat. Make sure it's still folded, and you start the shape out more how you want it to end up. This just goes better. Now you want to poke in at the edge and poke it down into the mat. So let me give give you a better angle here. I'm going to be poking in and catch that back side there. I'm poking in and at an angle again, and you will be attaching the wool to the mat. So you can kind of push the wool into place with the needle and then poke it down into the mat. So this is helping to create the shape, and the mat is kind of holding those fibers for us so that we can get a nice sleeve shape. And don't worry about it being stuck on the mat. We're going to pull it up soon. So there's my leaf shape with edges stuck to the mat. And you can poke in the center of it a little bit. We don't want to do too much here, but that's just going to help it hold together when we pick it up. Alright, so now you want to gently pick the leaf up off the mat and then flip it over. And here's those edges that were going down into the mat, so you want to fold those over and then poke them down, smooth that out. Here on the back side, wherever you have wool that is sticking up, you want to just poke it down, smooth it out. That's what it should look like, something like that. And then now we'll felt a little bit more on the edges from this side. You want to always go back to the edges and make sure they're getting felted as well. So here, definitely be going down into the mat. You don't want to go straight across and poke into your fingers. I'm going to try and get the sides of that shape with the needle. So working with small pieces like this, we're not going in super far, because if you're poking in far, you're going to be pushing fibers to the other side into the mat, and then it will be hard to get a smooth finish. So if you poke straight through down to the other side, those fibers will poke out the other side. So you want to angle your needle and kind of poke at a sideways angle, so you're still felting the leaf, but you're going to be getting those fibers to lay down without poking them through to the other side. Now I'll flip it over again. So every time you flip the leaf or pull it up, I've usually felt into these side edges again. If you find that you're poking your other fingers or your hand at this point, please get some finger guards, or you may want to hold the leaf with the other needle or with a skewer or some type of little tool, like a tweezers, like that. I've just been practicing for so long that I don't poke myself very often these days, so I have my other hand up in there. But if you find that you are poking yourself, please take some preventative measures. Alright, so keep doing the edges, the center of the leaf. These are very gentle, shallow pokes at this point, and you want to keep focusing on getting your pokes close together. Again, not straight down into the leaf as much, but instead an angled poking. It's kind of a 45-degree angle, and angled poking, just get those fibers all smoothed out and down. I'm going to go over each side perhaps 3 times. It really just depends how your own stabbing is going. But it's definitely good to shape gradually and go back and forth side to side. And this is about finished now. Here's how it looks. So now I'm going to take the needle and poke a straight line on the leaf. This will be like a center vein. So for this, you do need to poke straight down in and down into the mat. So a little bit deeper to get that line on. I just think that's a nice touch to have a center vein on the leaf. So that would have poked some fibers to the back side. You can either trim these with a scissors if you find that easier, or if you just poke again very gently at an angle, you can get those fibers laying back down. You might have to go over the line a couple of times. So your leaf will be finished when it's looking pretty smooth and firm. It's a similar shape to my original. It's never quite exact. We're just freeform sculpting the leaves. So decide where you want to put it on the pumpkin. Something like that. Actually, before we put that on, we should put the stem on first. So grab one of your stems. And to put the stem on, if it has a bend in it or kind of a curve, you can decide which way you want that pointing. A little character. And you want to open the fibers at the bottom of the stem. So just open them up. Pinch them apart like that. And then set the stem on the pumpkin with those open fibers right down on the pumpkin, and then that's where you want to stab in. I'm stabbing right in on those opened up fibers there at the bottom. You want to go around the whole thing. So for this, you also want to be stabbing in quite far, so give it more oomph and really get the needle in there. So the pumpkin is already fairly well felted, the stem is already felted, so to put them together and have it attach well, you have to poke around at more of a depth a few times. So farther depth, really poking way in there. You can poke on the bottom of the stem too, not just on the opened up fibers. But that can also help if you want to angle the stem one way or another. You can keep poking on it from the side. And get it staying where you want. Okay, so now we'll put the leaf on. And remember where the face is going to be in relation to the leaf. So the face would be the largest segment in the front here. And then when you get the leaf in position, just poke deeply and again on that center vein. I'm going about 1/3 of the way down the leaf. So right there on that center line, just keep poking until it's attached. And there it is. So if you want to move the leaf, you should be able to pull it off and move it around still at that point. Pretty forgiving in that way. Now we'll go ahead with the next pumpkin. So this will be a medium leaf. And this is the one where we want to have two that are about the same size. I'm just going to fold this up again and look. One of them might need a bit more wool to be the same size. Alright, so I'll go with that. And this is going to be exactly like the shaping of the other leaf. It's just that the shape and amount of wool that we're starting with is a little bit different. So I'm going to go in, catch that side edge again and poke it down into the mat. I'll do that for the other side, pushing the wool into place and then poking it down into the mat. So if you feel confident after watching the first leaf, you can always just skip ahead on the video. So this is going to be the same. I just wanted you to be able to see it. If you wanted to see leaf shaping again when the leaf is a little bit different size and shape. Alright, so now I've poked on the middle part as well, and now flip it over. Remember to take those edges and fold them towards the center of the leaf and poke down. So always do the edges. I like to turn the mat around and do the other side. And in the middle of the leaf, with shallow pokes, and doing it gradually, flipping back and forth from side to side. If you do too much on any one area first, sometimes it's hard to fix it, so that's why gradual is best. You make a mistake. So here I feel like I have a little bit of a thin spot on the leaf, so even once you've started, if you want to change something or add a little bit more wool, you can always add on, but it's not really possible to take wool off. But better to start small and add on if you need to. If you start too big, you can keep felting and shrink it down somewhat, but you might just have to start over if you've gotten too big. I'm just figuring out where I want this extra piece of wool. So even at this point, I could add on and make this side a little thicker where it felt kind of thin. And then just proceed in the same way. So that extra piece will just blend right in. And you won't even notice it after you get that poked on. So again, gentle, shallow stabs close together, and flip over periodically. And see, I still have some fuzziness there. If there are fibers sticking up still, that's where you want to poke more. And poke those down. Okay, this is close now. I think I'll go ahead and put on the center line. Just a little bit more on the edges there. I'm generally a perfectionist about my felting. Alright, but there's a nice finished leaf, and then poke the center line on. So deeper, harder, right in a line, keep going over the same line. That center vein, and then see if there are fibers that came through on the other side, and gently poke those down, or trim with the scissors. Alright, so there is a more medium-sized leaf for the pumpkin. It's going to be facing up and out unless you want to change your leaf placement. This is all open to interpretation. And now I'm going to try and make another one that's close to being the same size and shape. Sometimes that's the hardest thing, is to try and make another one that's about the same. So here I did that off camera. You can see they're not exactly the same shape, but I think they're close enough. Find the base side of the pumpkin. And I'll put the stem on this one. This one I might angle towards the back a little bit. It's slanted a bit. So open up those fibers again. And position it on the pumpkin. And then stab all the way around a few times. Okay. So you could either stand it straight up or angle it back a bit. It's kind of up to you. And if you feel like any of your stems are too long, you may want to trim them a bit. So you can just take a scissors and cut the top of the stem off if you want a shorter stem. And here's how I'm going to put the leaves. And like with the first pumpkin, I'm just going to poke about a third of the way on that center vein. Just the part that's right on the pumpkin. I like the rest of my leaf sticking up and out on this one. But again, feel free to change your leaf position however you like it. So there's that one. Just have now the small leaves for our last pumpkin. So these are even smaller. So again, it's all about the shape you start out with. And if you do find that you're prone to poking yourself, I've noticed that some people rarely poke themselves and other people seem like they're just very prone to it. So if you're finding this difficult with your other fingers close to the needle, there are all different types of finger guards that you can find. Usually online, but they do sometimes have them at Michael's or a Hobby Lobby. So the smaller the shape, the faster it goes, really. You just don't have as much surface area to work on. So the little leaves should go a little bit faster. Angled poking on the edges, pushing wool into place. Just watch the sideways pressure on the tip of the needle when you're working down into the mat. Just make sure you're poking straight in and straight out. Felting needles were actually not developed for this. They are used in industry. So that is why they rather easily bend and break. We're taking something that's used in industry and large machines to make non-woven materials, and we're using it for making art. They are a little bit less prone to bending and breaking. And that's just part of needle felting. Alright, so I think this little leaf is close to being finished. gentle little stabs close together, looking wherever you still see fuzzy fibers sticking up. Now the center line. Okay, so there's how it looks to do a tiny leaf. Now I'm going to do 2 more small leaves off camera. And just to show you, here were the other pieces of wool I had saved for these. And now that I've gotten one leaf put together, this is looking too big. I'm going to take a little bit of wool off of that one. And always work on these extra. Then once I've felted them, there they are, all finished. You can see they're not all this exact same size. I think it's actually looks more natural to have a little bit of variation. You want them to be similar. So here's the next stem. Just going to open up those fibers, put this on, probably just leave this one standing straight up. But again, up to you with your stem placement and leaf placement. Okay, so the stem is on, and now figure out where to put the leaves. I'm going to put them like that, I'm thinking. All in the front of the pumpkin. Dabbing in on that center vein so it holds on. Now these are not on so hard that they can't come off again, so I would try not to let pets or babies play with these. They could get off the stem or the leaves. Those would be choking hazards, I believe. Alright, let's now put on the faces. So this one has 2 little round eyes and kind of an oval mouth. To me, these faces are very fun. They remind me of emojis, and you could also change up the faces if you have other ideas for your pumpkin faces. So I'm going to tear off just a little bit of wool. This is the lava rock color. It's a very dark gray. Almost black, but not quite. So roll around your little piece of wool in your palm to try and make a little ball. And then you can also work with it in your fingers, folding it, pushing and pulling it. Try and get a round little ball to use as the eye. And then put it on your pumpkin and see if you like the size and shape. If it's too big, you can pull some wool off and kind of redo. So you can roll it around again, work with it in your fingers. Helps to get moisture on your palms, get them a little bit wet if you're having trouble with this. That looks about right. So I would also make 2 eyes that you have the same size before you put them on. That's kind of the hard part, is getting 2 that are the same. I find that people often tend to make them large. So just make sure you're not getting too much wool. It's just a really small amount of wool. There's a longer thinner piece for the mouth. And roll that around back and forth on your palm a little bit to condense the wool and start the shape. But then you'll probably need to work with it in your fingers to make more of an oval. That's what I'm going to start with for this pumpkin's face. And then position an eye where you want it to go. And then start stabbing in. So I'm going to stab a couple times on the center of it just to get it to stay. And then I'm going to work on the edges. So we're going to take the tip of the needle and very gently pull the wool into place for the edges, trying to keep a nice, smooth, rounded edge, trying to keep the circle shape. Bit off camera there, sorry about that. Alright, so there's one eye, and now I want to try and put on the other one right across from it. Don't get the placement quite right. You can take these off and put them on again. I'll show you that in a minute. Or here, if you just tack them on first, then and you haven't really poked too much on them yet, you can easily move them around. And if you find that you think they're too big or you don't like the shape, once you get them on there, you can go ahead and just pull it off. And you can just try again because you have plenty of this wool in there. There'll be plenty left over for another project as well. Future felting you might do. Alright, so there's my two eyes. So this is, I'm going to show you, this one looked a little bit bigger, so I'm going to try and see if I can make it a little smaller, just pulling and pushing wool. The other one maybe a little bit bigger by trying to pull a little wool out to the edges so they're about the same. And now we can try the mouse. My surprised pumpkin, or maybe it's just had a bit of a fright, frightened or surprised. So again, try and do the edges first. I tacked down the top, at the top and at the bottom of this mouth shape first, and then I'm trying to work on the edges to really get the shape right, and then I'll poke on the middle of the mouth area. So this I think is a little bit bigger than my original mouth. I'm gonna, even at this point, you can tear off a bit. It's possible to pinch off a little bit of wool. I'm gonna change the shape that way. Or you can always tear the whole thing off and start over. You have plenty of wool to work with. And if you have other ideas about expressions for your pumpkins, just give it a go. Of course, all kinds of little faces you could try on these guys. Look at my original. So I think the new one is still just a bit bigger. So see if you want to pull it off entirely, you just rip it right off there, and then you can either pull off wool here if you're making it smaller, or you can just get a new piece of wool. Or if you need to add wool, you could always add a piece right onto the pumpkin if it was too small. So adding is a little bit easier sometimes than taking away. If it's too small, you can just add a piece on or start over as well. Alright, so I think I like that a little bit better. Still wanting to mess with it, but at some point you just decide that it's finished. Good enough. It's really a very forgiving art form in some ways because there are a lot of things you can do to pull wool off or add wool if you're not happy with your first attempt. So here I'm just going to try and pop it out a bit. If it's very indented, you can use the tip of the needle very gently to kind of pop the shape back out. You just have to watch is that sideways pressure on the needle. So there's you just kind of get a sense once you've bent or broken a few of how much pressure you can actually put on it before the needle is damaged. Alright, so let's go ahead with this little smiley pumpkin. This one has triangle eyes and a nice smiley mouth. The happy pumpkin. So just pull off tiny pieces of wool again for the eyes. It's maybe too much. You just roll it around a bit again, and then I'm going to try and fold it, kind of fold those edges into the triangle shape. And I'll take that and position it. And then I like to poke the points first on a triangle. Make sure you get your points where you want them to be, and then poke the other edges. Try and get straight edges from point to point. So edges first, and then poke down the middle of the little shape. Now this is still, I can tell, a little bit bigger than my original. So you can decide when you put it on, is it too big, is it too small? Try and do another one the same size. Alright, so that looks pretty good. I'm just trying to see, one looks bigger than the other, so they both look bigger than my original. So you can see I don't even get them always the same. So this one, I'm just going to see if I can kind of pull and pinch it and poke it and get it to look a little bit smaller so I don't have to do another one. So remember, whatever direction you're poking with the needle, whatever direction it's pointing, it's going to push wool in that direction, so you can shrink it up a little bit. It's a small difference. Alright, so now for the happy mouth. So pull off a piece that you think will be about the right size for the mouth. And then I'm also going to try and fold this under a little bit at the edges and just kind of mess with it until I have kind of a smiley mouth shape. And here I'm going to start with the points at each side. I want the mouth to come up into a point, and then I'll work on kind of the rounded part at the bottom. So push and pull, just take your time and work the wool into a smiley shape. And yours won't look exactly like mine, just like my new one doesn't look exactly like my previous pumpkin. Fine, they all have their unique little personality, Very unique look in the end. Still smiley, just slightly different facial features. So, me being a perfectionist for the video, this does show you that you can adjust, pull off, change it, reattach, all that works. Alright, so we'll say that is good enough. Here's the other pumpkin. And now we're ready for the last one. So here you can see the color of these is not even exact. We do have differences in dye lots because we're dyeing in small batches. So these eyes are going to be rounded at the top and straight across at the bottom. A little smirky smile here. So this is a thinner mouth, kind of curves up to the left there. For the eyes, pull off another small bit of wool. I'm going to roll it around just a little bit and then try and work it into kind of another oval shape. So a small oval shape. I'm going to make a straight line across the bottom. I think that was a bit much, so I tore off a little bit. Think about a curved, kind of an oval shape at the top of the eye, and then a straight line at the bottom of the eye. Straight line across. Okay, there's one eye. Another piece, and try and make a similar one for the other side. So again, rounded at the top, straight, horizontal line at the bottom. I'm using the tip of the needle a lot here to just gently push and pull that wool where I want it to go. Okay. Eyes on. And now the little mouth. So this will need to be kind of a thinner piece of wool. This might still be too thick. See see how this goes. I'm going to fold the ends and then roll back and forth on my palm. I like making a little snake if you ever made a snake out of clay. And it still seems a bit thick, so I tore off a little bit. And then let's try it here. I want it to be somewhat thin as a mouth, and then thin it out a little bit there. Roll it back and forth more. And curve up more on the left side. Again, watch your fingers. You're getting on these little pieces. Your other fingers are often right next to the needle. Look at the original and try and thin it out and kind of move it a little bit. Alright, that's pretty good. Not exact, but you can still tinker with it a little bit. Okay. They might not be identical twins, but there may be siblings. Okay, so you should still have plenty of the Lavarack wool left. You can make as many face changes as you want. And here I'm going to grab the other pumpkins again. Feel that here they all are now that they're finished. So I hope that you've enjoyed this project and that you like the way that yours turned out. And I hope you'll come find us at feltedsky.com and check out our other kits and lots of felting supplies. So as always, happy felting!